I'm going to start very quickly with, okay, so this statue goes up. What was the reaction from your students, alumni, board members? Because it represents a shift, right, in some ways.
It's a great question. By the way, I will be very terse in my responses to questions in hopes that we might get to more. So I'll be very brief. The response was extraordinary. We have just over 1,000 students at Marist School in Atlanta, and they know what this statue means. Just about all of them take my Holocaust seminar class, and it takes us 2.5 weeks in my class to wade through this history. We move through it very carefully, very slowly, and as I say, this is just kind of we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here. And by the way, having said that, I would love nothing more than to come back to Chautauqua and do a more detailed presentation. Yeah. So y'all take care of that. You had said at the outset this was my first time at Chautauqua, which it was, and that implies there should be a second, I believe. Anyway, the response has been incredible.
Wonderful. All right, so one of our audience member asks, almost all Holocaust survivors are now gone. How can we non-Jewish people who have...
Can you start that again?
Sure. Almost all Holocaust survivors are now gone. How can we non-Jewish people who have known them personally help keep the knowledge and understanding of their experience alive?
Education. But education in the truest sense of the word. Education is different from schooling. Schooling is the piling on, as I've referenced earlier, of names, dates, and facts. It's instruction. Important to be sure, schooling, but just a really small part of one's education. Education comes from the Latin word educere, which means to bring out of, right? As in, if properly nurtured, one can educe a flower from a seed. And so one's education is, we might say, the bringing out of who God intends us to be. And so for me, education is something of a cure-all. Maybe that's an oversimplification, but I believe in it. And so the story of survivors that, of course, are becoming less and less frequent must continue to be told in schools, in classrooms. And the history of the Holocaust is, in my view, not adequately being taught, whether it be middle school or high school. And of course, then one of the ambitions of my institute at Marist is to create professional development opportunities for middle and high school teachers, both to teach the Holocaust and to teach the history of Christian anti-Semitism, or that is to say, the history of anti-Semitism, because we move beyond into the modern era. And in fact, I just got back from Manhattan 4 days ago, where I ran a workshop for educators in Catholic schools, 4-day workshop in partnership with the Tolley Institute, if you know of it, in New York. And we just had the most extraordinary experience. We had educators from all over the country, and of course, we are training them on how to teach the Holocaust. So to answer that question, for me, training educators, providing lesson plans, schooling, is one way. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of our in-person audience members is wondering, do you know of any efforts to take down or replace the old artwork in the cathedrals of Europe? And the second piece of that question might be, would that be the right path?
Yeah, take a look at page 2 of this handout. I want to show you a small detail. It's image number 2, page 2. So image number 2. You can see the imagery of ecclesia and synagogue circled, yes? If you look directly underneath each statue, you can just see a sign standing on the ground. Do you see those signs? There's one underneath each statue. Those two signs, this signage, was in response to a petition that had circulated around Paris some years ago, seeking the removal of these statues for obvious reasons. But of course, the cathedral is a protected historical site, and these statues cannot be removed. And so as a kind of compromise, they had erected this signage, which explains both in French and in English, first, what these statues are, what they say, what they teach, and then secondly, makes the case that the Catholic Church, this of course being a Catholic church, has rejected these teachings at the Second Vatican Council in 1965 through Nostra Aetate. And then it offers the word as to then why are the statues still there, which again is to emphasize the importance of protecting the historicity of the building. I find some churches have similar signage. But no, they have not been removed or taken down. Yeah.
Somebody's wondering, have you received any pushback from other Catholic theologians?
That's a great question. Have I received any pushback? Yes. Yes, I have. And look, I want to stress to all of you, and I'm sure you can readily appreciate this, that what I'm saying, what I have said here today and what I teach in my classes, including this adult lecture series, is not controversial. What I'm teaching is what the Catholic Church has been saying, and by the way, many other Christian denominations as well, be it the Methodist community, the Presbyterian, the Lutheran community. Most major Christian denominations have confronted the history of Christian anti-Semitism and have been working towards reversing that history. But again, those efforts have largely gone unnoticed. And so as much as it is important for us to learn the history of Christian anti-Semitism, it is equally important for us to understand what Christian, in partnership with Jewish leaders, have been doing in the last 60 years to confront and reverse this history. So, having said that, I have received some pushback from priests, from clergymen, who, by the way, can you imagine? Even many Catholic clergymen are unaware of this history. Even though this is changing, it's getting better, for sure. So I've begun conversations with the USCCB in Washington to teach my lecture series, in seminaries, which, of course, it needs to be done as well. Yeah.
All right, an audience member asks, Nathan Wilson at the World Council of Churches writes that social and political issues can be sources of contention or collaboration between Jewish and Christian communities, and I think you were referencing this a little bit on correcting the history or understanding this better. But can you think, and do you agree with that? That there can there can be sources of contention or collaboration, and if you agree, what can you think of examples of collaboration between Jewish and Christian communities?
Yes, I agree with that, and I love that question. I love the word "or." How did the questioner phrase that? It said collaboration, contention or collaboration?
Yes.
Which implies choice, doesn't it? So yes, I believe that tensions such as what we mentioned, tensions isn't even the right word, but this troubled history that we've mentioned can be a source of collaboration should we only choose it to be so. And that choice, of course, as it always is ours. Always. So, yes, I agree with that statement for sure. And then there was a second part to that question.
Examples.
Examples. Yeah, well,
collaboration that you would want to lift
I'll just give you a small example, but powerful for those who were in attendance at this professional development seminar that I just ran in Manhattan. We brought to Manhattan one of the leading theologians at the USCCB. This is the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in Washington, which oversees the U.S. Catholic Church. His name is Father Dennis McManus, a 20-year professor at Georgetown, and a leading theologian in Jewish-Catholic relations. We brought him in, and brought in Rabbi David Sandmill, who is a profoundly important rabbi in the United States, very influential. The two of them have known each other for years. They're very close. And what we asked the two of them to do was a 2-hour session with the Catholic school educators who were in attendance. And what they did is this is fascinating, they looked over passages in the Gospels from a Christian and a Jewish perspective. And of course, as we know, the Gospels were mainly, though not exclusively so, but mainly written by Jews who believed Jesus to be the Messiah. And so they are very Jewish texts. Of course, Jesus himself was Jewish, obviously. And it was fascinating for the Christians in attendance at the seminar last week to hear this rabbi say, or to reveal to all of us, kind of the underpinnings of these passages. And it instilled in us an entirely different understanding of the meaning of these narratives, which made them richer and more impactful for all of us. This is a perfect example of the kind of collaboration that we might invite our two communities to engage in. But again, should we only choose to do so? Yep.
Thanks. I'm going to modify this question just a little bit because I think this is what they're trying to ask. So many of our attendees some of them are going to go back to their churches and to their synagogues, and I think they were looking for tips on how do we have conversations not only with our rabbis and priests, but also with our congregants to make them aware of this history and to talk about this important topic.
Invite me in to do a lecture. You know, it's interesting. I kind of say that half in jest, but what I have found very often is when I deliver this lecture series to audiences, I'd mentioned so far our lecture series. There's a smaller version that's 2 hours, but it's not the same. The response often, particularly from Christian communities, is ultimately, in the end, and people say this to me in one way or another anecdotally as they come up afterwards, the response most often is, what do I do with this now? How do I, the word is, respond to this? And if any of you are involved in education, you would know that as a teacher, that is the sweet spot. Because that is truly the most we can ask of our students, right? And so what I find is that I then turn the question back on them and say, well, what do you want to do? And so they say, well, you know, I've never actually been inside our neighboring synagogue. Or if I'm lecturing to a Jewish community, they might say, I've actually never been to the cathedral. And so I'll help to effect those relationships and make arrangements to build sessions. For example, in Atlanta, they now have this annual community Seder at Temple Emmanuel in Atlanta. So I lectured there 3 years ago. And that lecture kind of served as a catalyst for relationships. So for example, I taught the class, again, 4 hours on in August, a few years back. The Rabbi Spike Anderson, called me the very next Thursday morning and said, Brendan, will you come back and do it again? And we had 300 people in attendance for the first lecture. And I thought, well, who else is going to come? And so I said yes. And so I came back 2 weeks later to do the class again, and there were 800 people in attendance. But the thing is, they all brought their Christian friends and neighbors. And it created this really interesting level of meaning. And so this lecture series that I've mentioned is meant to be an interfaith experience. And so if a community reaches out to me, I will often say, well, let's do it in partnership with your neighboring Jewish community. Or let's do it in partnership with your neighboring Christian community. And by the way, I speak in Protestant churches all the time. Presbyterian, for sure. But Methodist churches, Lutheran churches, all the time. So that really is the answer. Like, bring each other together and sit down together and do what that statue inspires. How are we doing on time?
Wonderful, and thank you for that. I am very cognizant of my friend that my friend Kwame Alexander is waiting to transition to the 3:30 CLSC lecture, which we invite you to stay here for. Please, Chautauqua, join me in thanking Brendan Murphy for this wonderful, wonderful lecture.
Thank you, guys.